my background with COBIT goes back, probably about to COBIT 4. And what was interesting is I was in an organization. I was the vice president of North American infrastructure, and we had frameworks everywhere. We had ITIL, we had TOGAF, we had PMBOK, we had multiple ISO standards. And what happened was our public accounting firm started to do an IT audit on us. And so I asked the auditor, I said, well, where are you getting these questions? What is the standard? What is the framework at which you're creating the basis of this audit? And this auditor said, oh, well, we're using COBIT. You've never heard of this before. I thought, oh my goodness, another framework I have to deal with. But what we found out was the auditors were using COBIT as a framework as a basis of their audit. But if they were using that as a basis of their audit, could I also use that as a basis to help me create my IT systems and my IT controls to be able to control those things? Absolutely. And this is where I fell in love with COBIT. I've been involved in COBIT 5, the COBIT 5 launch, and most recently was one of the expert reviewers on COBIT 2019. I will tell you that what I'm going to share with you guys today is there is something in this COBIT framework for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a project manager, you're a CIO, if you're a board member, if you're a compliance, or if you're an auditor. There is something in this model for everybody. And that's one of the things I really want to share with you guys today throughout the next hour, a little over an hour and a half maybe. And I could be on this subject all day long if we needed to. So here's a description of what we're talking about today. My point is this, don't wait for your next newsworthy event before you finally say, aha, let's adopt IT governance. Guys, I will tell you, I'm a consultant, and most of my work are organizations who have made it to the front page of the newspaper because of something that happened, and they call me and say, we need to do governance, right? Do governance before you have to. It takes some time, and I'm going to talk to you about, obviously, the leading framework that can help you do that, and that's COBIT. It doesn't matter what size you are. It doesn't matter what type of organization you are, whether you're a manufacturer, banking, service provider, or whether you're an internal or external auditor. Everybody can get something from this, and that's what I want to make sure that I get to you guys today. But the bottom line is you need to create yourself a governance system, and there's a lot of pieces to this system. And one of the things that COBIT has been criticized for in the past is that it's not tailorable to specific needs of specific organizations. I've got something to show you today that is going to blow you away. It will help you create a tailorable governance system for your organization. And it will also help you, regardless of who you are, there will be something in that session or in that framework for you. So therefore, some of the things I want you to get out of this course. Number one, hey, we're going to talk about the major components of COBIT. My assumption is many people in this course, in this webinar, you're familiar with COBIT, and there may be a lot of people who are not. So stay with me because I may be covering a couple of items that you already know, but I'll also share some things that you think you already know, and I'll give you a little bit different perspective of that. And so we want to look at how we apply these governance principles at all levels of an enterprise. I have a really nice model that shows us how we can link enterprise governance with governance of enterprise IT, but also how you link in some of these other frameworks. I have so many folks say, well, we use NIST for our governance framework. Incorrect. That's only for your cybersecurity practices. How are you looking at the governance of enterprise IT? Because cybersecurity is only one part of governance of enterprise IT. So we'll share that with you. We'll talk about the governance and management objectives, of course. Those are related to processes in the COBIT framework. And then, like we said, we're going to link COBIT to other disciplines or other areas in the organization. Particularly, I'll focus on NIST just a little bit more for you guys, okay? And finally, I'll walk you through how to create a tailored governance system. And this is, I think, one of the most powerful parts of COBIT. And when we say a tailorable governance system, you can also have a tailorable audit system and a tailorable compliance system as well. So that's a little bit on the learning objectives. And through the next several slides, I will be able to teach you about each one of those. And this is the agenda at which I will be doing this. We'll talk about the COBIT review, of course. And again, some of the things, we'll just cover some of the basic pieces of COBIT. Performance management, obviously a very big thing. I have some really good templates to share with you when this presentation's over on performance management, as well as something called the goals cascade. We'll talk about design factors. These are those areas that can help you create that tailorable governance and audit system. And I have a little scenario to show you on how you can link that into these design factors. Very quickly, we'll talk implementation. I'll give you some practical application information. And then, as always, my top tips to how you might adopt and adapt a governance system to your organization. All right? So just so you guys know, I'm keeping an eye on the questions and answers, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat. We'll have some time opened up at the end of this presentation where I will be able to answer questions. But again, I will keep an eye. And if you have a question during this, don't hesitate. Go out to chat or Q&A, and I'll be able to address your questions as I go through. All right? Okay, love this slide. This is a great way to give this a start. Is we have so many frameworks out there. And I mentioned this to you a little while ago, is you've got this guy that's got all these kits, right? He's got this kit, he's got this kit, he's got all kinds of frameworks out there, and all those frameworks are going to save his company. But folks, a framework doesn't save you. What is a framework, right? It's guidance. It gives you best practice information that you are supposed to take and modify that to fit your needs. But too many organizations take a framework and they now say that framework is exactly how we're going to do it. From a compliance standpoint, for example, there are countries. Many of you may know I work in the country of Jordan. The banking system in Jordan, the Central Bank of Jordan, took COBIT 2019 and said it is now a standard for the banking system. Turkey's doing the same. Many other countries are taking this and making it a standard. It wasn't designed to be that, but could COBIT become a standard? Yeah, if you wanted to, it could be a standard for your organization. My point is this, is there's not one framework out there that can do everything for you. But the one that can do this more than any of these is the COBIT framework. And I'll show you why in the next couple of slides. Okay, so let's talk about COBIT 2019. This is the latest and greatest. I will tell you guys, this is the only global framework right now that focuses on enterprise governance of information and technology. Now, COBIT originally stood for Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies. Today, it just goes by COBIT. So to get this kick started, we've got 4 publications that really make up the core of COBIT. And we've got the Framework Guide, Objectives Guide, Design Guide, and Implementation Guide. Let me tell you a little bit about each one of these, because what's very difficult, and I will fully admit this, is we say that COBIT is easy to understand, right? It's easy to take. Well, you guys know that you cannot open any framework publication, COBIT, ITIL, it doesn't matter, and flip through that publication and say, aha, I totally understand this. There are so many different areas involved, and there are so many different entry points into this framework. I want you to know where you look for certain things in each one of them. First one we have is what we call the Introduction to Methodology. I call that the Framework Guide. This is your starting point. This is going to describe the overall framework. It's going to describe what we call components. And those components are what you might recall as enablers back in COBIT 5. It's going to talk about the overarching structure of COBIT. It's a great place to start. This next guide, which is called the Governance and Management Objectives Guide. I just call that the Objectives Guide. This is huge. I'm going to show you some examples of how this Objectives Guide breaks down every one of these 40 governance and management objectives and describes those in terms of components that we have. So again, we'll jump into that in a little more detail soon. The Design Guide, brand new stuff. This Design Guide takes what we call design factors and helps you basically create a governance system or an audit system or a compliance system or an IT services system that is unique to your organization. This is huge. This is a result of many organizations saying COBIT is really not a one-size-fits-all. Now COBIT can be a way for every organization to create that system for themselves. And then finally, we have the implementation guide. This was a favorite guide of mine back in COBIT 5. This has been updated and with new information with the COBIT 2019 upgrade. Okay. So those are the 4 publications. These are available to you as ISACA members out at isaca.org/COBIT. So I would go out and take a look at those. All right. All right. So next, let's move on. I really want to talk about these altitudes. And what this slide is going to do is going to put a few things into perspective. So look over on the left-hand side, right? At the very top of your enterprise, you have enterprise governance or you have corporate governance. Right, then what happens here is we have governance of enterprise information and technology. Some of us refer to that as IT governance. And then what happens is everybody has all their frameworks down here. But what I want to do is link those down into the NIST cybersecurity framework for you just a little bit. And there are several others that we could link to, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about this cybersecurity and governance model connection that we have here. Because you guys know there's a distinction between governance and management. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Okay, up at the top, let's look at the highest level of governance in my organization. We've got enterprise and corporate governance. But what's happening here is we have this unique balance of what we call performance and conformance. What we're doing in the enterprise is trying to make sure that we can meet our business goals. And how do we meet our business goals? We may use something called a balanced scorecard. Over on the far right-hand side, we have conformance. And what does conformance mean? It means we're meeting, right, the internal, external, the laws, regulations that we have to meet. We see, they're all over, and these are not stopping. GDPR, Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI DSS, you name it. But the framework we're using there, mostly what I see are folks are using what's called COSO, which is the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. Now, if I can balance these two, what my goal is to create value for the enterprise. All right, so that's at the enterprise and corporate governance. Now, this middle piece here where it says governance of enterprise IT, skip that for a minute because most organizations do. They do not know how to govern enterprise information and technology. And so I had a situation one time where I was a CIO of a major organization, and I had a 22-hour incident, and I was invited to go talk to the board of directors. And when the board chairman asked me a question, he said, "What can this board do to help you?" And my response was, "I need to be governed better." And he said, "Wait, we're the governing body. We govern you." I said, "Actually, you don't. What you've done is you've told me to govern myself. And if you tell IT to govern myself, what you've just done is you've told me to, number one, make up my own rules. Number two, determine which of my own rules I choose to follow. And number three, determine the consequences on those rules I choose to break. I need guidance so I know which rules I need to follow. I need to know the lane in which I'm supposed to stay in. Because what I'm doing is I'm trying to bring frameworks into this. And this is what happens. Most organizations go right to the frameworks and say, the framework is going to save us. Not true, because you need to understand what parts of that framework are important to you. So therefore, this middle piece here is what I call COBIT. And I will tell you that COBIT is a gorgeous tool to help you manage your frameworks. Think about middleware, for example, right? What does middleware do for you in an organization? Middleware, it helps communicate between items, objects, and technologies that normally don't talk to each other. So what COBIT does is helps translate between enterprise governance and how we're choosing and leveraging frameworks in our organization. So look at the bottom here in these frameworks. I've got cybersecurity frameworks. An example here would be the NIST cybersecurity framework, for example, or the national publications. You've got RISC. I also put the CSF in there, but you could also have the NIST risk management framework. You could have several other areas there that might be helpful for you. You also have service management, things like ITIL. You've got the PMBOK, and you've got enterprise architecture, things like TOGAF. But like I said, as I had many organizations say, well, we don't need COBIT because we have NIST. But remember, NIST, take a look at here. Now, what NIST is a cybersecurity specific framework for us. Remember, COBIT is talking about overarching enterprise or IT governance, when NIST is just focusing specifically on that cybersecurity piece. So the thing I wanted to really show you here is that there are so many connections between COBIT and other standards, frameworks, bodies of knowledge, and those pieces out there that could help you out. So many of you might recognize this down at the bottom, where you have the NIST cybersecurity framework. These are my functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now, we connect these things through things called governance and management objectives and processes. So I know this is kind of a messy, busy slide, but I hope this has been able to help you understand these different altitudes of governance and how we might be able to link different frameworks into this, okay? All right, we have some key points to COBIT 2019. We'll only be on this slide for a few minutes because I'll jump deeper into some of these a little bit later as we go through. We have some COBIT key points here, and I talked a little bit about system and framework principles. And then what we'll do is we'll talk components today. I think these are huge. These components are what I call ingredients to your governance system, and I'll walk into those for you. We have focus areas. I'm not going to spend too much time on focus areas, but you might recognize that we already have one of the focus area guides out, and it's on the cybersecurity. So think about focus areas are additional COBIT guidance that takes the core COBIT framework and makes it unique and specific for a high interest area. For example, small to medium sized enterprises. Like I said before, we also already have the security focus area posted. We're working on one right now that I'm part of the group that's called the DevOps group, which is the high velocity deployment style that many of you guys may have heard of. And then finally, we have what we call design factors. I'll spend some time on those. These are the areas that we use to create a tailorable governance system. And I would be remiss if I didn't say we had something called governance and management objectives, and I'll show you what those look like. Okay? All right, so we'll talk to you about components. Let me spend a second on these, because if you were a COBIT 5 person, you might remember that we had these things called enablers. Enablers were awesome, but the problem is we didn't tell you in COBIT 5 how to use these enablers. It was a great list of things, but what we figured out is these enablers were ingredients to a governance system, and those ingredients we called components. And if you asked me in my organization, if you said, what are the big pieces of your governance system in your organization, I would give you these components. I would give you a 3-ring binder, and I'd say each of these tabs describes each of the ingredients to my governance system. And the first tab would be processes, right? What are processes? We've got 40 processes. I'll show you what they look like soon. We got 40 processes in the COBIT 2019 framework. They're associated with objectives. Processes take inputs and turn them into outputs. Every one of these processes is actually broken down into what we used to call control objectives, but they're now broken down into what we call practices. And each of those practices is supported by a number of activities. And this is really, really, really cool stuff. Next, we have what we call organizational structures. This is the RACI chart. This is the understanding who might be responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for certain parts of that process or parts of that objective. We have information flows and items. How does information come in and how does information go out? And this is really cool because this can now help you create your data flow diagrams and those kinds of things. If you're an IT professional, it helps you understand what other processes are involved in me being able to deliver my services. If I'm an auditor, it might help me look at other processes I may need to audit in order to ensure that that we are conforming to internal policies, external compliance requirements, and so on. We have people, skills, and competencies. These are the skills required and the competencies required for each one of these objectives that we have. We have principles, policies, and procedures. This is awesome because anytime we have a policy, that has to link to one of my principles. But think about this, guys. If I go change a policy in my organization, do you think I need to also consider that policy's effects on processes, that policy's effect on information, that policies effect on people's skills and competencies, and so on. Next, we have culture, ethics, and behavior. This is the means at which we behave as an organization. Are we a high-risk culture? Are we a low-risk culture? Are we the type of culture that if something goes wrong, we go try to punish people, or do we try to use that as a learning point? There's a lot of leadership accountability in culture, ethics, and behavior. And then finally, we have services, infrastructure, and application. Everybody knows, and this goes back to another framework called ITIL, the IT Infrastructure Library, that an IT organization exists to deliver services for its enterprise, right? As your customer, as a business unit, I don't care about your servers, routers, switches, hubs, and applications. What I care about is that the service works. And so how does that service look at its relationship between infrastructure and applications? You'll see here in a few minutes where this whole list that I just went through becomes very, very clear what this really means to us in a second here. So I told you we talk about governance and management objectives. Do you guys remember I told you there's this distinction between governance and management objectives? So on the governance side, right, we have a domain and it's called EDM, evaluate, direct, and monitor. And I'll show you which objectives and processes line up with these. So EDM basically says, okay, this is my governing body stuff. Next, we have APO, align, plan, and organize. You might think about this as my design and my strategy. We have BAI, or build, acquire, and implement. I think about this as if I'm deploying a new service or I'm retiring a service, it goes through BAI. DSS, think about that as my run phase. I have live services. Now I need to make sure that they stay up. And then finally, MEA. For anybody here on this course that is an auditor or say a compliance person, right? This MEA is going to be the one you're going to want to look at, right? Because MEA is going to include information like my performance and conformance. It's going to include things like my internal controls and my compliance to external requirements. Now, let's take a deeper look into each one of these for us real quick. What you're looking at right here, if you look across the top, what you see are governance objectives and you see management objectives. Under each one of those, you see those domains we just talked about. Folks, you are looking at the 40 governance and management objectives in the COBIT framework. And when I told you earlier, this basically is, there's something in this for everybody. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. Take a look at this list. There's at least one or more of these governance or management objectives that is applicable to you. If you are a governing body, or if you are any type of governing body, you look at EDM, evaluate, direct, and monitor. Right? If you're IT management, you're going to want to look at APO. If you take a look at IT under APO, we have a lot of processes down there that might really be applicable to you. If you look down at the bottom, you see managed vendors, APO 10. That's going to be your third-party risk type of stuff. If you look at APO 12, managed risk, that's if you're on the risk management side. What's interesting on the risk management side for APO 12 is it has another process involved with it that's what way up here in EDM 03 called risk optimization. So risk optimization would be the governance side of risk, where APO 12 will be the management side of risk. APO 13, managed security. Obviously, if you're a security professional, we already linked some of that back to the NIST cybersecurity framework. If you're in BAI, this may be if you're a program project manager, if you are looking at change control or organizational change management, configuration, and so on. Deliver service and support. This is my live stuff. This would be the folks who may work on, say, my IT operations team, or say even my service desk, right? Because we're looking at service requests and incidents and those things. We also have a security services process in there called DSS 05. All right. Then finally, for my compliance, my audit teams, we're looking at MEA, like I mentioned before, right? These are things where we're looking at performance and conformance, internal controls, and managed compliance with external requirements sitting right there. So I'm going to do a check real quick because, again, it looks like things are kind of slow. I want to make sure there's no latency. So let me go out. I'm going to go to chat real quick just to do a check to make sure everything's good here. Because something was really weird with my, there was a glitch in my internet that basically caused things to slow down for me. So I'm out of chat right now to make sure you guys can still hear me, that I'm not talking to myself right now. So I put a chat out there. Anybody that can hear me, go ahead and let me know out there on chat. All right, I'm not getting anybody saying anything to me on chat, so I hope I'm still broadcasting. Ah, there we go, Ezra, thank you. All right, so good. Now let's do this. So I just talked to you about all of those governance and those management objectives. Remember, there were 40 of those things sitting out there. So where do you find information about those? So let me pull something over. Remember I told you we'd talk a little bit about the governance and management objectives guide. Remember that? All right, so let me bring this guide over and we'll take a look at this guide real quick. This guide that you're getting ready to look at this is available to you as an ISACA member. And in this guide, what it has is it has those 40 objectives we talked about, and it gives you information on those that is absolutely huge. So let me do this. Let me go to a page there. Let's talk about one of the processes. We'll go to, let's say, change control, okay? Or change management. So I'm going to let the screen catch up here a little bit. What you're looking at here is called BAI 06. So let me zoom in just a tad for you. So if you look here, it says BAI 06, managed IT changes, okay? In BAI 06, that's change management. What this guide does is it gives us a description, right? And that's a description of that objective. And again, it tells us here's what this process actually does. It also gives us a purpose statement. And that purpose statement is why this thing exists. But here's what's really cool. It shows us how that objective links into the business. And I know we haven't talked about the goals. This process or this objective called managed changes actually supports the enterprise goals. And I'm going to show you what that means here in just a few minutes. But remember, every one of these objectives is now broken down into its 7 components. You might recall we talked a little bit ago about the components. And you remember those components we said there are 7 of those components. Now, I zoomed out just a little bit because I know that we're not going to go over the specific details in each one of those, okay? And I see I do have a question on NIST out there. I will answer that for you here in just a few minutes. But if you look right up here, it says component process. Remember we looked at those components a minute ago? Process was the first component. Guys, you're going to love this. Every objective or every process is broken down into practices and activities, okay? We're in the process component here. Let's take a look. So what kind of practices and activities are we dealing with here? Well, the first practice says BAI 0601. It says, make sure we evaluate, prioritize, and authorize change requests. What's nice is this is one of several practices. If you are an auditor, this would be your control objective. It gives us some example metrics here. Now remember, every one of these practices is broken down into activities. So you say, hey, Mark, that's not enough. Just having that information is not enough. Well, look what you've got here. You've got several activities. These would be what we used to call years ago detailed control objectives. If I'm an IT person, I'm using these as guidance on how I'm going to put this practice in place. If I'm an auditor, I will use these as the basis of questions I will use to collect evidence to make sure that this practice is behaving correctly. We'll talk a little bit about the capability levels that they discuss over here in just a few minutes. But remember I told you that COBIT could be a framework to help you govern and manage your frameworks for this practice. Now what COBIT does is says, hey, we're only going to give you the practices and activities. You need more information? Oh, well, here's where you go. You can go out to this ISF. standard of good practice. You can go out to ISO 20000. You can go out to ITIL, or you can go out to PMBOK to find more information out. So as an IT professional, this is great. So now I have a good reference point for other frameworks that I can be using, as well as if I'm an auditor, I can now look at other areas that I might be able to find additional auditing guidance to help me with that. Now remember, every process is broken down into practices, and we just saw the first practice. Here's the second practice. It says, hey, you need to manage emergency changes. All right, that's a practice. That's a control objective for me. Gives me information about that. It gives me example metrics. And if that's not enough, it gives me the activities. So I'm not going to jump through all the details. I wanted you just to appreciate how powerful the information is in here. Our third practice is we need to track and report that status. There's my metrics. There's my activities, any related guidance. And then practice number 4, it says close and document those changes with my activities and so on. Okay. So what we just did, guys, is we just looked at the process component. Remember, I had 7 of those components. That's why this governance and management objectives guide is where you should be spending your time. Now let's go back to a question. It was, hey, can we say NIST is sort of a subset of COBIT, which covers only cybersecurity part? I would, from an enterprise governance perspective. If I'm your CIO, if I'm your board of directors, COBIT is my enterprise governance model. And a subset of that are multiple other frameworks, frameworks for service management, framework for architecture, frameworks for security and protection. That's where NIST would fall in for me. Now, if I am a cybersecurity professional in the organization, that's my framework, but COBIT sits above that. That's my position, and that's how I'm seeing organizations successfully adopt these frameworks in the same environment. So I hope that answered your question for you, okay? All right, so what we've just seen is the first component called process. Our second component I looked at was called organizational structures. In organizational structures, what this does is takes each one of those practices we talked about. Remember, we had 4 practices in this area, and it gives us a RACI chart. Now, you notice here that it's only giving us responsible and accountable. We changed that in COBIT 2019 because the consulted and informed roles could be drastically different for any organization out there for us, okay? So what we did is said, hey, we're going to give you the accountable and responsible roles, but in your organization, based on your unique culture and structures, you need to determine the consulted and informed. This one is awesome. So what this component is information flows and items. And I apologize, I had changed the color of my pen to red, and when I had to reset everything, that went away. So my apologies for having the same colors here. Now, information flows and items. We're just in the change control process. It takes every one of those practices, guys. Remember, we had 4 practices or 4 control objectives, and it tells me now what information comes in and what information goes out. So now as an IT professional, I know that I can only have a certain level of maturity in my or capability because I may not be receiving all these inputs from the other folks. Now notice, it gives me specifically in COBIT where this information comes from. And it also says outputs. Here's the thing that comes out. Here's who it goes to. That is really, really powerful stuff. So next thing we have down here is we have the component called people, skills, and competencies. For this objective called manage changes, we need to have a couple skills, and here's the references for those skills. Here are some relevant policies and procedures. That was one of my components out there. My culture, ethics, and behavior, and finally services, infrastructure, and applications. Folks, the idea here is that this gives you a full breadth of all the information you need. And what we just looked at, let me go back and show you something to make that powerful. We just looked at a process called managed IT changes. We just looked at that one. In this guide, whatever your role is in your organization, let's say you are internal audit, internal system control, go to MEA2. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Let's say you work at a service desk where you handle requests and incidents. There's your process right there. You are a continuity manager. There it is right there. You are data. There you go, right there. So the intent here is not to teach you all the details about COBIT, but help you appreciate that this model, again, is actually there and could help anybody in your organization. So before I move on to the next piece, we're going to talk performance management. I did get a question that says, why activities in a practice have different values, and what does this difference mean during assessment implementation? So we're going to talk about performance management right now. So that I'll answer that question for you. What happens is if a process, so we have a process, remember that process is broken down into one to many practices. And each of those practices is supported by multiple activities. You might have noticed, I think this is where this question is coming from. Next to those activities, it had a capability level of 2, 3, 4. I don't think we had any that were 5, but it had a capability level next to it. What that means is this next part we're talking about performance management. If you are required to be at a capability level 3 for a process, those activities that you have that had a 3 next to them and anything under a 3 also have to be met in order for you to be at a capability level 3. Okay, so it's a little complex on how we look at it when we look at the overall assessments, but that's what those numbers meant for you there. So I hope that answered your question for you. Okay, so let's talk performance management real quick. One of the things that COBIT has done, COBIT. When we were on COBIT 5, we had a very, very detailed capability assessment model. And we still use that today, in fact. But what we're now looking at is we figured out there's a couple pieces involved. We have capability that we're looking at the practice and the process level. But maturity is more of an overarching look at how the organization is behaving. They still use the 0 through 5 scales. But in performance management for COBIT, we wanted to make sure that you could use any type of assessment model you wanted. You could use the COBIT 5 process assessment model. You could use the capability model, the CMMI model. But these are basically the principles of performance management. Hey, we want this to be simple to understand and use. Now, you guys know there's no such thing as an assessment model that's simple to understand and use. But in the big scheme of everything you could choose from, the COBIT assessment model is probably one of the simpler ones that I've seen out there. So we want to be able to support the COBIT model, which says, I want to be able to assess processes, the 40 processes, and have repeatable results, have flexibility, and be able to support different types of assessments. Those might be, again, CMMI, those might be ISO-based assessments, and so on. So when I mentioned to you a few minutes ago that there's a couple of different levels, what I would tell you this is, if you look at processes, remember we just looked at 40 of those things. When you are assessing a process, what you are doing is you are assessing process capability. That's it. Because capability says, how well is that process achieving its purpose statement, and how well is that process producing its outputs and outcomes? Now, what you can also do, remember all those, remember process is one of 7 of my governance components. Remember those 7 components I talked about just a few minutes ago. We can also rate a component at capability level. But what happens is, if we look at this from an organizational perspective, this rolls up to a maturity, which takes all these capability levels, rolls those up, so we can now look at maturity level at an organization. And this is where you might use the capability maturity, or the CMMI, right? The CMMI model. And if you guys didn't know, ISACA, right? The CMMI Institute is part of ISACA, okay? So what does this all mean? Let me show you some practical application of this next. So take a look at this model right here. This is an organization, actually, that I talked to within the last year, did a full assessment of all their processes. And what we decided was to focus on a few key processes right here. So this is a diagram. By the way, this picture you have right here, you will have this and many other templates in a PowerPoint document that will be available to you that comes with this webinar. So you notice around here, around the outside, we have different processes, okay? These processes were the key processes that we were focusing on from an assessment standpoint. But what we did is we did an assessment, and we did a current state assessment. So what you see here in the center of this is 5, which means, hey, if you're a level 5, man, you are awesome. This thing is in a continual state of improvement. If you're down here like business process controls, that thing's a 0. That didn't even exist in this organization. So I did a current state assessment. And then what we had to decide was, well, that's our current state, but what's our future state? And that's what this next set is. So let's take managed changes, for example. Remember this one? We just looked at that a few minutes ago. And what we said on managed changes, our current state was right here at about a, let's see, that would be 0, 1 at about a 2. Our future state, we needed to be at a 4, and therefore what you're looking at is the gap, okay? So anyway, this is one view of how you might be able to do this. This is not all 40 processes. These are the ones that we felt were the most impactful. How do you find those out? I'll show you in a few minutes. But again, this template right here, I will have for you in PowerPoint, and I have several others that you guys might like to play around with that might help you when you're looking at performance management. But a lot of people say, well, how do you do that? I mean, how do you come up with these numbers for these things? That's the next slide. This slide right here, you will also have as a PowerPoint template. So this is just an example of one of the process that was called Insured Governance Framework Setting and Maintenance. These are my current state observations. So you might notice here we had one of these sheets for every process that we evaluated. So now you look up here, the process purpose. Surprise, surprise, that came from COBIT. The practices we assessed. You notice there are 3 practices in this area. The artifacts we assessed, those artifacts were the outputs. Do you remember I showed you in the Governance and Management Objectives Guide, the information flows and items, and it said, here are the things that come out. That's what you're looking at right here. So what we had was an observations post that said, based on these practices and based on these artifacts, here are our observations. Therefore, our current maturity level is 2. Where do we need to be? We need to be at a level 3, and that's based on organizational goals and objectives. But what we also did is said, let's put some vital signs on this. Right? Again, these are both pegged to low, low, but it could be anything. It could, for your organization, it could be medium, right? Or this could be high, right? But we wanted to take a look at the business benefit of this process, as well as the complexity of the process. We had 40 of these things, folks. And this now allowed us to go back and look at how we did that assessment itself. So again, there are several other slides there for you guys, but I think you'll like some of the templates that I'm providing you guys on how you might do an assessment, as well as how you might report that information to your board or to your committees that are looking at the assessments. Okay. Now I want to make sure it's very clear here. When I do an assessment, this assessment that I'm doing right here, this is not an audit. Okay. This is me assessing whether or not the process is achieving its goals and it's achieving the practice objectives. Now, can audit use this information for an audit? You bet. It's primary data, right? It is evidence to show that the practices that process is actually focusing on. So I really like how that comes across. Okay, good. So next thing we have is what we call goals cascading. Guys, this is, in my mind, this is one of the best kept secrets in COBIT today. Because what goals cascade does in COBIT is it now helps us it helps us map ourselves from specific stakeholder drivers and needs specific to my organization. And COBIT has a series of tables that now links enterprise goals to alignment goals, links alignment goals to these. And these are tables that are actually in the book. And I've got a download or a template for you guys to use for this. So it starts with stakeholder needs. Now, COBIT doesn't give you these, right? What COBIT says is your stakeholders need to make sure that we are receiving value from the services that IT provides us. So what I'm going to show you in just a second is an example of a series of spreadsheets where we took my organization's specific needs, we mapped them in to the COBIT goals cascade, and we use that cascade to tell us which of those objectives are the most important. So you might think back to that assessment that I did. Remember around that periscope circle, I only had a number of 12, around 12 processes that we looked at. We found that out by doing this thing called the goals cascade. So let me pull up a document for you here. This is an Excel spreadsheet. So what you're looking at here is, let me zoom in on this just a little bit for you. What you're looking at here, if you look at the bottom, it says stakeholder needs to enterprise goals. That's the tab we're on. This company we're going to call them Service Co, right? And Service Co, what we said was, these are our specific goals. Now let's map those specific goals into what we call the COBIT 2019 enterprise goals. COBIT 2019 has 13 generic enterprise goals. And what you're looking at here is a number system. And that number system, if I go back to this first sheet here, this number system says if there's a number of 1, means there's little to minimal relationship. All the way up to 3 means, hey, this is a big deal. If it has a 3, it's a showstopper for me if I don't make that. So let's go take a look. So what we did is we gave a number system. Like, look at this. For example, it says 3 right here. That means this 3 right here means if I don't meet this goal right here, it's going to have a drastic effect on me meeting that higher level goal. So what we did was we did an evaluation of these, and these were our own evaluations. We said, okay, let's take a look. And at the end of this exercise, what we found out was we did a summary of these. Now you can weight these if you'd like, if some are more important than others. We found out that there were some of these that were really, really important to us. So in order for Service Co to meet our goals, we had to meet the COBIT goals that are here in red. That's the first piece. That's the first piece. What you just saw was this. What you just saw was this link right here, okay? We did that ourselves. So now let's go take a look at these enterprise goals and how they link to alignment goals and how those link to governance and management objectives. And again, you guys will have a copy of this spreadsheet. This is yours for being in this presentation. So then we said, let's take the enterprise goals to alignment goals. This gets a little bit harder to see. Again, the whole idea here is these are the goals we just saw a few minutes ago. Those are the enterprise goals that we said were the most important to us. And we now link those into what were called alignment goals within COBIT. You might remember these as IT-related goals in earlier versions of COBIT. Now, as you're watching me do this, folks, think about how this can help you in your role. You can scope audits this way. You can fund projects this way. You can create you can create new and change services by linking them back to this cascade. So what we said was, hey, here's how these things link up, and we did the same thing. We did a numbering system on how those look. Now, you might recall in COBIT, so I have a numbering system in here. What COBIT actually has is either a P or an S. We put a number system. A P says there's a primary relationship, and S says there's a secondary. So we did that, so check this out. So now based on that information, we could now take those alignment goals, the important alignment goals, and we could now link those to the governance and management objectives. Guys, I know I'm covering a lot of stuff here, but you will have this spreadsheet, you'll have this information because you may have to sit back a little bit later and say, how do we actually do that again? My intent here is to let you know how powerful and how you can actually apply this in your organization. So those alignment goals now map to the governance and management objectives. Guys, what you're looking down the left-hand side right here, these are all of those 40 governance and management objectives that we had in the organization. So now that's awesome. So we can look and I can boil this thing down to this. Guys, what you just saw in about 6 minutes is I took my specific organizational goals that were unique to me. And I linked them in. I mapped those into the COBIT goals cascade. And based on the information that COBIT goals cascade, here are the governance and management objectives I should be focusing on just to be able to achieve business goals. Okay. So hopefully that was helpful for you. This is a whole course in itself, just talking about the goals cascade, but that spreadsheet, you will have a copy of it. I will let you have a copy. You just watched me create a set of specific organizational goals and go all the way down and say at the end of that whole thing, we came up with a set of governance and management objectives that were most important for us based on being able to meet my enterprise goals. And that was your kind of your goals cascade overview for you. So I'm going to move on here because I know that I may be running a little bit late, but please stay with me because this next piece is huge. And these are what we call design factors. Now, tell me if this has ever been you in your organization. I get this question all the time. Mark, how do I create a tailored governance system, right, considering my current environment? Because I can't just copy and paste COBIT. I need to have a way that it meets my specific and unique needs. Well, that's what we're going to talk about with these things called design factors. These design factors are pretty awesome. Now, this is new stuff. Now, I will tell you how this started, basically. I was actually helping an organization, and this was a global organization. These folks were out of Europe. And what they were trying to do is they were trying to scope an audit. They were trying to scope a global audit. And they said, Mark, can you help us figure out how we really determine what the most important things are? Because all they've been using up to that point is a risk assessment. So what we did is the first thing I did with this organization is I said, let's look at your enterprise strategy, right? That has a lot to do with how you may be auditing. Because if I'm an organization that says, hey, we need to grow. Don't worry about saving money. We're willing to spend money. That has something to do with how I might be auditing. Then we looked at enterprise goals. You know what that is? That's the goals cascade we just looked at. We use that goals cascade for this organization as a primary means of determining the audit. Because if it's important to the business and the business's survival, then I should be auditing it. And we looked at the risk profile. Of course, that would be the risk scenarios and the latest assessment we have. And then we took the IT related issues. We took those four things. The IT related issues are the pain points. These are things you know you're having issues with, so you need to audit them. And so what we did was we took those four areas and collectively said, now let's scope the audit. And so that was really, really neat exercise, and which led to the first four design factors of COBIT 2019. So of course you see here, we've got the enterprise goals. We've talked issues. If you talk about threat landscape, right, that's the threat. Are we in a high, medium, or low threat environments? Compliance requirements. This would be interesting for like the compliance folks out there. Do we think we're in a unusually high compliant requirement enterprise, or is it about what you'd expect for this type of organization? The role of IT basically says, hey, is IT a order taker, or is IT a strategic enabler for us? The sourcing model for IT says, hey, do we build things in-house or do we outsource things? Under IT implementation methods, right? Well, I wish I could get into this one a lot, but do you do a waterfall type of approach, or do you do, say, Agile or DevOps types of approaches? Your technology adoption strategy, are you first to market, or or first to buy the latest technologies, or do you wait until they've been tried out before you go buy these things? Enterprise size, of course, you use small, medium, or large enterprise. So let's hold off on that. I want you to look at these design factors for a second, because I'm going to go back because I know we have a couple questions out there. I did have a question that says, how do these practice activities capability level relate to target objective capability and refinement phase in DF? Nihal, I apologize. I'm not sure what you're asking there. It says practice activities. So we have a capability level of the practice activities, right, at the activity level, how they relate to target objective in refinement. Oh, yes. So they could be different, They actually could be different based on your unique organization. So I'm going to show you that in a minute because we're going to talk about the design guide tool and kind of the link there. So hold off on that one for a second. After the goals cascade, can we use the resulting alignment goals importance to assess and update existing specific IT strategic objectives, KPIs, and initiatives? You certainly can. You certainly can, because what those alignment goals are going to do is they're going to tell you which of the governance or management objectives are most important for you. And each of those governance and management objectives has key performance indicators in them, as well as metrics that you can use for that. So that would be a correct statement, okay? Okay, so now we took a look at these design factors. How do we actually put this into place? So let's talk about this quick scenario, and we'll talk about the design factor application. So this scenario is a live company we're getting ready to talk about. So this is a regional managed service provider in, and this is, this is a regional, so this is North America. They're not across all of North America, but they have a very large footprint. Again, this could be anywhere. But let's talk about this organization. So they're focusing on outsourcing IT. And so let's think about it. Let's say everybody on this call today, let's say we all owned our own company together, and it's a bicycle manufacturer. And let's say we determine that, we don't run IT very well. We're not real good. IT is a high risk for us. So let's outsource the IT organization. And you would outsource it to this company. This company would be your help desk. This company would be your applications development and those types of things. So core services that this organization that we own together, right? We have a service desk, right? Or a call center for customers to call. We manage your networks. We can manage your infrastructure. We can manage your applications for you. We can provide you cloud services. Go away, you. We can provide you private cloud services. And of course, we can do performance and we can do security monitoring for you. Those are just some of the things we can do for you in this. So let's go back and see for each of those design factors, how we can create a customized and tailored governance system for this company. So let's go take a look at those factors next. Take a look down the left-hand side. Those are all the design factors we have. And Nihal, I'll get you a question here in just a second for you. So we said first, enterprise strategy. Look at the very top. So we've decided as an enterprise that digital transformation and aggressive growth is very important for us. High tolerance risk financially, and we can lose clients as long as we're meeting our goals. Now let's talk about enterprise goals. Some of the important goals for us are managing digital transformation, right? Secondary goals include managing risk and compliance. So to go back to the question we received earlier, the goals cascade that I presented, this is for you, Nihal, is an alternative to the toolkit for design factor 2. Absolutely, it could be. The design factor tool in the toolkit only does it at a enterprise level, enterprise goals level. The goals cascade that I just showed you basically has the same outputs, but it's a little bit more detailed for you, okay? We have a risk profile, and the risk profile, we've said we're concerned about third-party incidents. We're concerned about technology innovation and data and management and architecture expertise. We have a couple of IT-related issues, service delivery problems from outsourcers, and we'll see this come up here in just a second. Our threat landscape, we consider that very high. As a managed service provider, many of our customers are targets for cybersecurity activity. Compliance requirements, because we have a lot of customers in a lot of different industries. We consider our compliance requirements being very complex because every one of our customers has different and unique compliance requirements. The role of IT, we kind of consider them a factory mode, which is they're just kind of an order taker right now, but they need to be strategic in order to support our overall growth strategy. Sourcing model, we outsource some stuff. We use the cloud very extensively, and we do very little of our own development in-house. We use a waterfall approach for our IT delivery, but we need to have DevOps approaches in order to complete this. And then finally, we do adopt new technologies as early as we can. Again, you guys can go back and take a look at this as you need to, but I want to just give you a glimpse. So Nihal mentioned this thing out on the questions about the toolkit. This toolkit that I'm getting ready to show you it's a free download for you guys. Okay. And what this does, again, this is a very busy thing up here. But what I want to show you is you're looking at here's what's called the canvas. And if you look down at the bottom here, it has each one of those design factors. So design factor 1, you see, is called enterprise strategy. The goal here is not to teach you how to use the tool, but to show you this tool is available. So in this design factor, we said, okay, well, here's enterprise strategy. We fill in our basic information on this. We go to design factor 2. This was the goals cascade. So Nihal, so I go back to you and say, if you look at this, this is the enterprise goals. What you might notice here are this was the enterprise goals. And so what we would have to do in order for this tool to really be effective for you, you need to map your specific goals into the generic enterprise goals in a COBIT, or you're just guessing on this one, okay? That's where this is important. And then what this does is if you say, here's the importance level, it will then tell you which of your, let's go down and look. It'll tell you then which of your governance and management objectives are probably most important for you. Stay with me for a second. Guys, I know I'm going to be running over on this, but I hope you stick around and hear the last part of this. What you look here down the bottom of this tab 2, where we're talking about enterprise goals. Notice on the left-hand side, we have all of those governance and management objectives right there. It goes all 40 of them. And it said, based on my input, look over to the right where you see these bars. It's going to show me the relative importance level of each of those governance and management objectives. Okay, so I'm not going to go through each one, but you guys see down the bottom here, it has a tab for each one of my governance and management, or excuse me, each one of my design factors down here in the bottom green tabs. But let's go back. Once you've filled that out, what you're looking at here is if you zoomed in on this, over on the right-hand side, it's going to tell you for each of those governance and management objectives, it's going to tell you the relative importance. That's what these green bars are. So if you see right here that it says, hey, I've got a green bar here in line 22. It's got an 85. Again, it's a relative importance. If you look over, based on every input that we just did, if you look over, it's going to say APO 12, managed risk, is a very, very important process for us to take a look at. So what I did in this design guide tool is basically took that information from our scenario, right? From our scenario. Let me show you what came out of that scenario real quick. So let's go back. Remember in that scenario, we took every one of those design factors and we all said, here are findings for each one of those design factors. And then what happened is that once I did that design toolkit, you notice what it told me. It told me, hey, here's where your most important processes are. Now, one of the things that's really interesting here is, and this kind of came up as a question before, is I know it's very small to see, but you can go in the design toolkit and see it. That gives me a target capability level. So the design guide tool will also give me a suggestion on what capability level I need to be at. And that's the capability level that we talked about before, the 0 through 5 capability level. Can you change it? Absolutely. But the question that went back to Nihal that said, hey, what's the link between these things? Generally speaking, if you look into the governance and management objectives guide, we looked at managed change, said here are your suggested capability levels at that activity. It could change for you depending on your tailored governance system for you. Okay. Guys, I know this was a lot of information, but I want to make sure that you understand that this is a big deal. So let's go back. Let's go back to my scenario. What we just did is we had this company, right? And this company had some very specific goals. And we went through the design factor analysis. And based on that, I now know out of those 40 objectives, I have a set of critical objectives I have to focus on. I have to focus on risk optimization, enterprise architecture, managed risk, managed security, security services, and compliance with external requirements. Guess what, guys? If I'm your CIO, That is where I'm putting my efforts. Urgent objectives, those would be these. Think about these as my priority 1, my priority 2, and my priority 3. Notice all 40 aren't in there, but in order for me to have a tailored governance system, these are the ones I have to have. Now that's from a CIO perspective. If you're an auditor, don't you think if you want to make sure you're scoping your audits based on value contribution to the enterprise, guess what you're looking at right here? You got it. You're looking at the objectives or the processes you should be auditing. And if you're not, you have not done us any good in my enterprise by helping me control my, look at my internal controls. That is absolutely huge, okay? Now what compliance can do, if I have internal, external compliance requirements, I can actually link those compliance requirements into these and say, how are we satisfying these compliance, right? So the question was, hey, these 3 groups of important objectives, how is this deduced from the result from the toolkit? What we did here, this was our own information. COBIT didn't give me the guidance on this. What you're looking at here, Nahal, COBIT did not say this. What we said when we went through the design guide toolkit, we basically took, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We took our top 20. You're looking at 20, all right? There are 40 full objectives. We said we're going to focus on the top 20. And that was based on the weightings, right, at the end of the design toolkit. And so we took these and said, okay, let's look at these. And we basically broke those off because you remember how in the design toolkit, it gives you kind of a number. It's 100% match, 90%, 80%, so on. We did that and broke them up into this. And that's how we did this because we knew we could not attack 20 processes in the next 3 months. What we said was, I can attack these processes in the next 3 months, these processes the 3 months after that, and so on. Okay. So this is how you make this usable for the organization. COBIT did not tell me how to do this. Not this one right here. It gave me the list of those 20. I had to figure out how we did it from that point forward. Okay. So implementation, very quickly, one of my favorite guides out there. There's only one slide on this. So what we've basically done, guys, is said, we got this thing called COBIT. We have these components, we have objectives, we have all this great stuff. But what I want you to do is I want you to look at those design factors and I want you to say, hey, how do we determine which of these objectives are the most important for us to adopt and implement? Now you implement them. And what I like about this implementation guide, again, this hasn't changed significantly since COBIT 5, but it's basically broke up into 7 steps from what are the drivers, right? All the way. So these are 7 steps to implementation, and this should be continuous, right? That's why it's in a circle. It should be a continuous approach. You don't just do this one time and think you've adopted enterprise governance. It has to be done on a regular basis. Do yourself a favor and look at this because this is nice, is notice these different rings that it has. You've got this outer ring here, which is this dark blue. Those are your program management types of tasks, right? Then you've got change enablement, which is organizational change, right? Is that middle ring. And then the center ring is your continual improvement stuff there, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit more on practical application. I've tried to put some of these things through this as we've talked through this, but there's a lot of organizations, right? This is not just for IT. This is for a lot of parts of the organization. So if I'm a risk professional, what have I just shown you, right? I've shown you that in the governance and management objectives, we do have risk-based processes, right? We have risk governance processes. We have risk management processes. Go find the process that's most applicable to you and go into that governance and management objectives guide and see how it's describing that to you. The other thing it has, and again, we didn't have a chance to really focus on it much in this course, it has a set of risk scenarios. In the design guide, remember we looked at the risk posture, one of the design factors when we talked risk? There's a set of high-level risk scenarios that breaks them down into even more detail for you. So if you don't have a set of risk scenarios, COBIT has a starter kit for you. Okay. Recently, you guys might be aware that ISACA just released a publication called CRISC IT. This replaced the CRISC IT framework that we had from many, many, many years ago, as well as the COBIT 5 enabler guide for risk. course, we have that risk design factor that you can look at in the design guide tool. And what I like is the risk side synchronizes in the objectives and everything. They synchronize well with the NIST cybersecurity framework, as well as what's called the risk management framework. Okay. If you're an auditor, you've got the entire MEA domain. That's that last set of all those processes at the end. If I'm an auditor, every one of those interests me. Now, remember, if we looked at the process practices, if you're an auditor and you need to scope an audit, you have no idea the questions you need to ask or the evidence you need to look for, a process practice can be your control objective. And remember, those activities can be the questions you're asking, and the information flows and items, the things that come out, could be the artifacts that you're looking for. So use that design guide to scope your audits. When I just went through that short organizational demo for you and said, okay, here's this organization, here's our design factors. We're using that to focus on our IT efforts. Do the same process to scope your audits. And of course, ISACA, if you're not familiar with them, go out to the ISACA site. There are what we call audit and assurance programs that are based on COBIT, which basically help you build an audit plan for that. So that way, everybody's using the same overarching framework. If I'm compliance, just like I said with audit, go to the MEA domain. We have a objective out there which talks about compliance with external requirements. One of the things that we saw as we walked through every one of the governance or management objectives, we saw that each one of the components referenced a framework. It will also reference an external requirement for you if that exists. And compliance could also look at those maturity capability levels to help us look at how well we're compliant to each one of these areas. Security side, on the security side, kind of almost similar to the risk side, is we do have some security-based processes. But remember, what I think here is important for you is you can take those security processes out of COBIT and you go one level deeper. That is your NIST cybersecurity framework. So go back to that picture we looked at about an hour and a half ago. And that's the model of how we're really trying to link the activities within COBIT down to the cybersecurity efforts. And of course, security synchronizes very well with the NIST CSF. And if you're an ISO person, it does sync with ISO 27000 series quite well. And you might be familiar, we do have the information focus area publication that is out. And so that's out there for you here. Now, kind of having said all that, is a lot of people say, Mark, this is great stuff, right? You've given us some examples, all these things, but you know, we don't have a high level of executive level support. You know, we don't have the board level support. We don't have that. You know what I say, guys? It doesn't matter how big or small you are. Let's say you are trying to adopt this governance model in your organization and you have no executive support or you have no board support. Folks, use this model within the four walls of your own organization. Consider your own organization an enterprise, right? You have management and governance of your own department. You can take this down and do it at that level. Again, it takes a lot of resources to do many of the things, but do what we just said. And so some people say, well, we can't even use COBIT because we don't have the enterprise focus. Like I said, focus at your level if you have to, because that will be very huge for you to be able to adopt this. And you'll see over time that all of the organizations next to you are going to start looking at the same model. So the whole idea is, before you get into this, look at the drivers. Why are you adopting this program? Please, guys, don't be adopting this program because you just made the front page of the newspaper. Adopt this before you make the national news, and you may not make the national news. This is a lot of work. You guys know this stuff doesn't take place over 3 months. This is a multi-year effort for most people, and you're never done. Make sure you have the right stakeholders. Make sure that people know from an organizational perspective why you're adopting enterprise governance. And in fact, one of the interesting things is at a very large financial organization that I worked with, we were adopting enterprise governance, specifically using COBIT. And my board of directors said, don't come in here and use the word COBIT. We don't care about COBIT. What we care about is enterprise governance. So we use COBIT, we never used the word COBIT, right? And it became our governance model, because sometimes people think that the framework's going to save you. So we didn't want to blame our failures on the framework. We had to blame our failures on our leadership. So make sure you get some education. You guys are doing this right now. This may be the first step in a governance effort that you have in your organization for the next several years. But you may want to consider going out and doing. ISACA does offer COBIT Foundation training courses, and there's also what's called a design and implementation course, which focuses on the design factors and implementation too. So get an education so everybody understands what the core pieces are to COBIT. When we talk about the design factor analysis, I really challenge you guys to go out and take a look at those design factors. Go download that design factor tool and do the process that we did today in a very, very quick manner. The hardest thing, though, is for everybody to agree on your design factors, on what those design factors are, for everybody to agree on the priority of the goals, for everybody to agree on which of my risk scenarios are the most important to me, for everybody to agree on what our enterprise strategy is. That's the hardest one to do, okay? Next thing I want you to do is consider the cultural aspects of this. Are we a high-risk organization or not? Again, I mentioned this to you before, that this has a lot to do with your executive level support. Culturally, do our executives actually support this? Or are they just saying, yeah, go do IT governance, okay? That's a really important piece there. And continually monitor this. Guys, like I said, as an executive, if you told me, let's say I'm a board committee member for you, or committee chair, and you come to me and say, we're going to adopt IT governance. So I'm going to ask you three things. I'm going to say, number one, how much is this going to cost me? Number two, how long is this going to take? And number three, what do I get out of this? Right? So you can determine some budgeting for this, because there may be training, some tools you have to look at and so on. But I said, when I asked you, how long is this going to take? Guys, like I said, this is never done. This is why organizations fail, and this is why organizations make it on the newspaper, because they think they're done implementing IT governance, and they put a binder up on the shelf and say, good, that project is complete. This requires continuous effort, and we have to make sure that we're continually monitoring that. People say, well, how often do we update our design factors? I said, well, we did on an annual basis, or I see organizations doing it on an annual basis. Formally, they update it quarterly. Now, if something in the environment changes, you got to change the design factor. If there's a new compliance requirement, if there is a new pandemic, if things like that are major trigger events for you to go back and look at how you might be able to tailor that governance system. So before I finish up here, let me go through and make sure that I got all the questions out there so far. Nihal, I think I got your last question. Grouping does not relate to the target objectives capability level. That did not. We did not group those to the target capability level. However, I will tell you this. Things that were more urgent for us generally had a higher capability level for us. We did not have anything that had a target capability level of 5. I will say the things that were in the urgent column were generally 3 and 4. And that was our decision, because if we would have tried to make things 4 and we didn't have to have it at 4, it was a waste of our time and resources, okay? About adjustments in the toolkit, what could be sample reasons for adjustments? Let's take the country of Jordan. Let's say that the governance domain, EDM, evaluate, direct, and monitor. Let's say I go through and do my toolkit and I do my design factor analysis. And all of the processes in EDM say, hey, based on what you just told us, you only have to be at a level 3. However, the country of Jordan says it's a compliance requirement. You have to be at level 5 on those. So that's why I would do an adjustment. I would do an adjustment to say, based on our analysis, we only need 3, but it's a compliant requirement that we be at 5. You could adjust that. Another example might be management. Management might say, you know what? You have that process target capability level at a high level, level 5. We as management do not agree with that, and we do not think we think we'll be wasting time and money for that. It is our intent to drop that to a level 3. So those are some examples where you may be able to do that, okay? There is no standard unless you are in a country that says it has to be a certain level. There is no legal requirement for you to be at a specific level of capability or maturity on a process, unless it is a legal compliant requirement for you, like it would be in some countries, okay? COBIT 2019 for risk. Is it done or planned? It is in progress right now. I do not have an ETA for you on that, but I do know that the one document that has been produced is the risk IT document. So that should be coming out. So I don't know exactly when that's the focus area that was out there. Okay. Tina says, wonderful session. Hey, thank you. Recommended to understand COBIT 2019 in detail before the CISA exam. Not necessarily for CISA. I would say if you're going after CGEIT, there's definitely a connection with CGEIT and a little bit on CRISC. For CISA, I wouldn't worry as much. I would say that still you should probably have a good understanding of COBIT. Either way, I think it's a good framework for governance, risk, and compliance and assurance professionals to know. Why the toolkit target capability does not have level 5. Good. You know what? You got me on that one. It could. I think that my feeling on this is you guys know that a lot of organizations want to be at 5. And I will tell you that I truly believe that if you are at a 5 on something, you may be redirecting resources to an area that putting resources to an area that you probably could be spending a little more time on there. But when you see that it doesn't go to 5, it could go to 5, by the way. When I look at the design guide tool, it's just none of the processes I had there went to a 5. So yeah, that's a good question. That one I don't know on that background for you. What be the ideal team composition to implement COBIT driven by IT? Can it be implemented only in IT? Yeah. So Srinivas, this goes back to what I said earlier. So let me give you my thinking on this, okay? The preferred method is that we have enterprise governance, and then enterprise governance drives the governing of enterprise IT. There's that link. So we usually drive that through the use of maybe committees and boards, right, and those kinds of things. But if we have to drive it from an IT perspective, who's my dream team on this, okay? Number one, the CIO, the highest ranking organizational member of the IT organization. Number two, I would want the enterprise risk manager, because that role is key for me, because I'm looking at those risks on that. Do I want internal audit involved? They're not on the team, but I do want my chief audit executive or internal audit to be aware of the efforts, because they are a beautiful consulting organization for me. They can give me advice on how I might be able to put together these practices that are in an auditable state, okay? So I would also want my business continuity or my continuity team on this. Definitely my service management side. These are the folks who are driving my IT services. And that would be my services, my infrastructure applications teams would be part of that. I would say that any relationship management team, relationship management being like some people call BRM or business relationship management, and service level management side of the house. I certainly want the business involved as much as possible. Because again, I've been in multiple governance implementations where IT is saying, I got to implement myself. But I think having the business unit involvement is a huge, huge thing for most organizations out there. Also, cybersecurity, your CISO. Some organizations, the CISO reports to the CIO. In some organizations, the CISO is a separate role. But be very careful that cybersecurity is not the only show when it comes to governance. If I'm your CIO, cybersecurity is only one part of my governance, risk, and compliance. I've got services compliance, service I'm dealing with. I've got risk, so many other areas. So I think that would be a well-rounded team. Of course, enterprise architecture would be a big benefit to us if you have that enterprise architecture role, IT operations. And I would treat it, if I were implementing IT governance, a key role is to have your PMO involved, because you'll need to treat this as a series, as a program, which includes a series of projects, because you need to make sure that you're not pulling people off of other important projects to adopt IT governance, right? IT governance is making sure that we are optimizing our resources. So use your PMO to do that. And I think you'll find that'll be very helpful if you have a solid PMO for that, okay? Okay, so I'm running through here. Any other questions? Max capability of 4, max objective. Yeah, so, good question on that, Nihal. I would tell you, honestly, unless you are absolutely required, I would tell you that it is very, very rare for anybody to be at a level 5 on something on that. So let me take a look just real quick. Hold on, 100. I just did it. I just went to the design guide. Yeah. So that's a good question. I don't know, because I've never taken a process to level 5. So that's a good question on it. If you're going to level 5, it's my professional opinion that you're wasting resources, to be quite frank with you. Okay. How could you monitor the implementation of COBIT within the organization? Do this through your IT governance or your IT steering committee. And that is the organization that will be communicating to your board of directors or the highest level of governing body for you. That's the tool to use, an IT governance board or IT steering or governance committee. That is how you monitor the implementation, because that's the overarching governing body who is accountable for overall governance implementation for you. Okay, so hopefully I got that for you, Fahmi.